Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Heartland Mamas. I'm Marie Briel.
And I'm Heidi Henry, coming to you from two separate studios, socially distanced, at the edge of the Great Red Divide. And Marie, I'm starting to feel like we're the blue island in the middle of the Great Red Sea. As we talk about bringing the message of the progressivism and the Democratic Party unofficially across the USA from Illinois to other areas where the messaging doesn't get out. And that brings us to our show today. But before I do that, let's talk about where you can find our previous episodes at heartlandmamas.com, on all podcast platforms streaming, as in today, YouTube, and of course on Demcast USA. Okay, Marie, tell them what we're going to talk about, because that's why we're doing this.
Okay, so we had a discussion about the fairness doctrine about 6 months ago.
Yes.
And Heidi and I have mentioned it a few times over the last year, and the importance of the fairness doctrine and what that means. So we really want to talk today about what the doctrine actually is, a little bit about its genesis, and how, like everything, it's a living, breathing entity, right?
Well, not anymore.
Everything changes with society. So we're able to do those things, and we need to make sure that we're revisiting this. We have tried to re-implement the fairness doctrine multiple times,
Right,
in multiple Congresses, and it never goes anywhere. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and why we are now where we are with the proliferation of conservative media outlets, with the conglomerates that occur, and how that stifles voices, which again is kind of the genesis of Heartland Mamas. So we're going to start with the two are very connected. So it's the Communications Act of 1934 established the FCC as a centralized regulating body. So we wouldn't have radio and telephone. It all fell into one category.
right.
And in that Communications Act, it laid out some pretty basic essentials, and some of those were making sure that there was equal time, that nonprofits had an opportunity, that that certain licenses wouldn't go to too many people. Well, as we yeah. So as time moves forward, and mass media and more media forms begin to proliferate, there was the Mayflower decision. And the Mayflower decision was in 1938. And that decision said that radio stations had to put public interest in the forefront, or emerging situations had to be at the forefront of all communications.
Yes.
So that seems a really logical and very smart thing. And then the next thing you know, Congress says, hey, let's add the fairness doctrine. So Heidi, tell us a little bit more about the fairness doctrine.
Well, the fairness doctrine was supposed to give equal viewpoints. Okay, so I use the analogy about chopping down trees in our 6 month ago broadcast. We were in the same studio, by the way. And in that analogy, I said, if you're going to talk about chopping down trees, you're going to talk about why and the why nots. So you're going to give both viewpoints so that the public is well informed, and so that they can make decisions based on the facts and information they hear. That was the fairness doctrine. So that you couldn't just taint it all with one, shaded all one way. It had to be shaded, or not shaded, but it had to be fully colored out so that you could see all the different facets. And
yeah, it required that all broadcast networks give a equal time to both issues and or arguments,
right,
that concern public and national interest.
And we're gonna give you a little more history. Sorry, Murray. We're gonna give you a little more history, and then we're gonna tell you that not having the fairness doctrine is why we have approaching 170,000 deaths and 5 million people infected. Right, so we're getting to that point, but we want to give you some more background. So go right ahead, Marie. Sorry.
Oh no! So that's all it was. And now keep in mind, there was also an amendment put in about equal time, but that's not what this is. This is stating that, and that was because there was a smaller amount of news stations and
Right.
media outlets. And as that grew, throughout time, it sort of changed.
Right.
So, it seems like it's a great idea, and everybody seems to be in favor of it.
Right.
Well, along comes Nixon
Huh.
and the civil rights movement
Right.
and the expansion of media,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes more a way to control the narrative and the story. As masterminds figure out how powerful media is going to be,
Right.
they also realize how detrimental the fairness doctrine is.
Right.
That it requires them to present both sides of an issue. When you're running a campaign for something, you want to be able to present only your side, right?
Right.
So this is where we get into why we have what we have today. Go ahead, Heidi.
Well, what happened is that along comes this horrible person that everybody knows is a deeply disgraced man, Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes, founder of Fox News, shows up. He hadn't started Fox News yet, and he taps Nixon on the shoulder and he says, "Guess what, Richard? We can twist the media to show you in a better light. To show
Actually,
you..."
what's really funny about this is that Richard Nixon met Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes went to a university in Ohio
Right.
with a radio broadcast degree. He graduated. He was doing interviews in Ohio, and he interviewed Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon said that TV was a gimmick. He didn't believe in
Didn't
TV.
believe in
and
it.
that was in 1967.
I know.
Well, 2 years later, guess who is running
Nixon's,
all of the television for Nixon?
Right. That would be Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes.
And you have to understand, Roger Ailes is the epitome of the white, male, misogynist, bigot, pervert on the planet. I mean, if there's a photograph for those adjectives, it's Roger Ailes. Okay? And then his buddy Rupert Murdoch, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes. Because the thing is that through all of Watergate, Ailes is spinning and spinning and spinning. But unlike the current occupant of the White House, Nixon turned over the information that was demanded by Congress, and that caused him to have to resign the office. And
well, he actually, in Nixon's campaign, he actually just is the one who used the Southern strategy.
Yes.
If any of you have ever heard of the Southern strategy, it's where they utilize the racial tensions
Yep.
and segregation.
It's the Foghorn-Leghorn effect.
To normalize it, to make people afraid,
Right.
and that's how his method was to win the election. And it worked.
Yes.
And then he's also responsible for the orchestra pit theory. Have you heard about the orchestra pit theory?
No,
Heidi?
go ahead. Tell me all about it.
So Roger Ailes was in an interview one day, and he was talking about how you could have two people up on stage,
Mhm.
one having a solution to solve all the conflicts in the Middle East,
Right.
and the other person falls into the orchestra pit. The one that will be on the nightly news is the guy who falls into the orchestra pit.
Right.
And that he figured out about human nature and revenue and marketing, and used that in order to create the strategies that gave us Ronald Reagan.
Right. And let's talk about a little bit about Ronald Reagan, because Roger Ailes is this kind of guy that believes in the Wild West myth that, there was only white cowboys and there was only men working on the ranches, and they all came in with their guns a-blazing. And here is a former TV actor and movie star, Ronald Reagan, and he is a cowboy for real. He has a ranch in Santa Barbara, which, if you have never been there, that's where the air is rarefied, is in Santa Barbara. It's a very expensive place to live, and it always has been. And here comes Ronald Reagan, and Ailes helps create this Ronald Reagan presidency. And he was, he was an okay governor of California, not great. But he created the persona and helped create the legend, not the legacy, but the legend of Ronald Reagan. So it was his tutelage that brought forth the person who, even though as much as I hate the current president, I hate him more. So because the damage that Ronald Reagan did to my generation is ongoing.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, up to now, we haven't seen the fallout from the
Well,
president,
that's very
have we?
true. That's very true. But Reagan destroyed the unions and the middle class, and that provided the pathway to get where we are right now. We couldn't have a.
And Reagan also installed someone as the head of the FCC.
Yep, that was a
Who
puppet.
was very much in line with him and who had worked with him and decided that we didn't need the that there was no longer a need for the fairness doctrine.
No need at all. No need at all, because Roger Ailes had this puppet called Ronald Reagan that he could pull the strings on anytime he wanted, and Ronald Reagan in turn got a puppet to represent him legally. And what was his last name? Fowler? Was it Fowler?
Yep, yeah. Fowler.
Okay. So anyway, so Fowler went and took it back to the Supreme Court, and you go ahead and take it up from there, Murray.
So it went bye-bye because they basically said that it was stifling the First Amendment. So then we start thinking about the First Amendment, right? And this is where a part of the perversion of the First Amendment began. We've perverted the Second Amendment.
Yep.
We have given the First Amendment the right. Corporations now have freedom of speech, and this all is intertwined in how we ended up where we are today.
Right.
And one of the things about it that's really frustrating is this was where they said, okay, we need to give the ability for free speech to every type of informational outlet that there is.
Right.
We need to give them all the benefits that print media have.
It started around the concept of pay-per-view or advanced cable, that on those stations that are paying, and not everybody, so they weren't going into your home like ABC, NBC, CBS were. These were pay-per-view or cable channels. So those should be held to a different standard, is how they brought this up and how they sold this to the Supreme Court. So along comes Roger Ailes' new BFF, Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch is an Australian, and he had a lot of money. And he also was ultra-conservative. And as we learned from one of our viewers last week, what are they conserving? The status quo, which is powerful white men, right? The patriarchy and the misogyny and the bigotry that is colonialism.
Yeah.
So that's what they're conserving. That's what they want. The white is might, and also Rupert Murdoch also used this as a great experiment for himself to try to prove the stupidity and the lack of depth in learning that stupid people, especially Americans, had. That they were lazy learners and they wouldn't look any more past the headlines. And we know, Murray and I know, you know this too, that a lot of people don't read past the headlines. How many times do you post something that you took 25 minutes to read and people go, yeah, I know, and you're like, you missed the point. You missed the point because you didn't read the article, right? Because that's the type of society that Murdoch and Ailes developed, is this soundbite headline meme philosophy of journalism.
Orchestra pit theory.
The orchestra pit theory.
Orchestra pit theory.
Don't be a lazy learner.
That has glammed on to every aspect of our media and every part of
That's how we
media.
get Twitter.
Now, we're not the only ones who have said that, and that brings us up. So, we've tried to reinstitute the fairness doctrine multiple times.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to 2005. We tried to do it. It was introduced by Louise Slaughter. In 2007, Dick Durbin and John Kerry tried to do it. In 2008, Nancy Pelosi tried to do it.
It's always the Democrats that try to bring back the balanced discussion, right? It's always the Democrats that try to bring it up, and the Republicans are like, no, we can't have that happening, because they own of every day when Murray and I sit down and do this, we realize that we are 10% of the voices heard in the USA, that 90% of what people hear every day is conservative talk radio, conservative viewpoints on cable news, of conservative media outlets all over the place, and that progressive outlets, especially like ours, very small market share. That's why we always tell you to share, and tag your friends, because that's how we get our voices out. We're not going to get the funding that the conservative ones are going to get. We're going to have to keep fighting for our market share too, because that's important to you to hear both sides of every story, right? And where Murray and I try to be fair and balanced.
You just brought something up that makes a lot of sense, and that is the you said we're never going to have the same market share, right? Democrats aren't going to get that.
Nope.
But a part of the problem is the consolidation of media markets.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So it falls more into the monopoly category.
It does.
Which is one of the things that the Decency and Communication Act of 1996 says is a no-no. But who do we have in charge of what we have? Okay, so in May 28th this year, President Donald John Trump did his executive order on censorship for social media corporations, right?
Right.
And we know that he does have some power. And then we had the whole TikTok incident. So as we take away these
Murray, I have to ask you.
Barack Obama was not in favor of restoring the Fairness Doctrine.
No.
He felt that it wasn't the right thing to do, that it was sort of outdated and archaic, which I totally get. He wanted to see caps on network ownership. Hell yeah, conglomerate, problem. 3 people own 90% of all the conservative talk media outlets. That's definitely disproportionate and puts viewers and listeners and regular people at a disadvantage.
And Murray, don't forget about syndication, because all of those conservative pundits a lot of them are syndicated. So even like in Ottawa, Illinois, there's a little station called WCMY. What do they play in the afternoon and evening when they don't have a personality? They play conservative,
right wing.
Yeah. Oh, it's garbage. It's like a few times I've tried to listen to it. I'm like, what the hell are you talking? It's so bizarre. It's tinfoil hat worthy stuff. And I think that they get these things, and I'm not sure the station management actually listens to what they're playing, you know? I'm like, what the hell have you heard this? You turn it off.
I have to say, I went down there, and I had to go down for some reason, and I was listening to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because you grew up there.
It was my uncle's funeral. And then the next day, Steve and I went down, and we were listening. And I'm like, wow, this sounds like the same episode. Are they covering the same topic? We played the same episode from the day before.
I'm telling you,
on the next day.
They're not listening. They're not listening to what they're playing. And it's not just that radio station. It happens all over. You can pick that same show up from all across the Illinois Valley where I live, and hear it over and over again. And same thing with our local newspapers. All of them around me have been purchased by a right-wing company called Shaw Media, and they gobble up these small papers. They condense them down to 1 day a week from daily papers. They make them small, like a little ad rag, and all you get is syndicated columnists, a few local news and viewpoints, and the police blotter. That's it. They want you to know who's doing what bad, but they don't want to tell you anything else. And it's ridiculous. I can't believe what's happened to the Ottawa paper since they bought it a couple years ago. It's just like gone, you know. It's just junk. And I realize a lot of people don't read the newspaper anymore, but still, it's part of your community. You know, when your kids makes on a roll, you go and buy several copies and cut that out, right? And send them off to people you know. No? Get yours online.
It's all digital now.
That's true. Sorry, my kids are grown-ups now.
The other things that he advocated for were net neutrality, which we know we've talked about, and that's a nightmare. Increasing resources for public broadcasting, increasing resources for the public, or increasing the public broadcasting bandwidth, and increasing minority ownership in media outlets.
Right.
So those things are all amazing, and yes, those are things we need to do. But right away, in order to try, how are we supposed to put caps on network ownership or increase funds for public broadcasting or bandwidth? when we are so far to the right
Yeah.
that no one has anything else. So we really need to re-implement the fairness doctrine
Right.
to start. Then we can amend it, we can change it, but we need to do something from the
Well,
beginning, and that's why it's so important.
And Murray, I think my problem with this is more recent, because when we did our episode 6 months ago, COVID-19 was just more of an idea. Okay? And all of our lives have changed since then. And listening to Fox News reporting early on, and I went back and because it's all digital, so you can pull it up at any time, and listening to them call it a Democratic hoax. It's limited to just people from China. It only attacks people who have pre-existing health conditions. Listening to the misinformation that was given out at the state-run media behest of the President of the United States.
Well, now there's more stations out there like Fox. There's
Right.
OAN, and then there is
it Republic Media?
Newsmax.
Newsmax, that's it.
Yes. So they're proliferating. There's more and more of them. And Heidi, you're 100% right. To me, okay, you can have a media outlet that only supports right-wing ideologies and puts it out there.
Right.
Fine. We're not saying you can't do that. When it comes down to things like COVID, like you brought up,
oh my God,
where there are people denying that it is real, denying that there are solutions for it, denying that there's a way to help it, or that it even exists, that comes down to national interest.
That comes down to national security, because we have 5 million infected people. 5 million infected people with no end in sight. We know we are on track between, now the CDC says 300,000, the World Health Organization says up to 500,000 people dead in America by Christmas time. We have an infection rate that could go as high as 25 million people. And what do we have? 319 million people? Infected. 327. Infected people in the United States. It means the degrees of separation between somebody you know having it and not knowing anybody that's had it is so small at that point. When we have lost the fairness doctrine, and we've lost the ability for fair and balanced reporting, people die. And we see this now. And I realize you're not going to stop all the conspiracy theorists and the real, like the Newsmax organizations, things like that. But there has to be some culpability out there for causing people to burn in a fire. And I'm going to use a fire analogy here. If you scream fire in a crowded movie theater, and there's no fire, you can go to jail. And I think if you deny a virus that's killing this many people, infecting this many people, you should also be going to jail. And that includes the president, because people are dying from irresponsibility.
And it's funny that, if you're in a movie theater and you can create hysteria,
yep,
by yelling fire,
yep,
and get caught, you can go to jail. But you can yell fire on the internet or on Fox News and not face any repercussions.
No repercussions whatsoever. There's no laws in place right now for those types of repercussions, and that is an abomination. I studied journalism briefly in college because I took another path, but the things that impressed me were the integrity of reporting. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. Not coloring and shading the story, but the black and white facts. Those.
We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
How there's always been a coloration, and people's opinions always come through. But the circumstances that involve national security, that are of life and death. I mean, just go back to the hurricane where we used a Sharpie.
Oh my God!
News and threatened people who worked at the National Weather Service to not tell the truth.
Right.
And we had news outlets that this was legitimate.
That was
it was actually happening.
That was about a year ago. Yeah.
Public safety.
That wasn't even quite a year ago that our president took a map of a hurricane approaching northern Florida into Georgia and South Carolina. And because earlier in the week he had said it was going to go to Alabama, Mississippi, New Orleans, he took a Sharpie and made the weather pattern larger. Who the hell
Which
does
he could have
it?
very easily said the weather has changed,
Yep.
the wind has shifted.
Oh, that's exactly what had happened. The wind shifted and it went north on the east side of Florida instead of the west.
Instead of saying that, he chose, because of his inability to be wrong.
He wasn't wrong. It's the weather. It's the weather. It changes. But what happens when there's a hurricane warning, if you haven't lived in the South or if you don't live in the South right now, when there's a hurricane warning, you board up your windows, you put tape across things, you get stuff up off the floor, and you evacuate. You take grandma, you take your dog, you take your plants off the porch, everything, and you go. And when you mobilize Alabama, and the problem is in Georgia, well, you have a problem. The southeast of the country is not the same Alabama to Georgia. It's just not the same. There's hundreds and hundreds of miles in between. So now you've got people fleeing for the wrong reasons and people staying for the wrong reasons. It's absolutely batshit crazy, Murray, and we've got to stop it. And Dick Durbin, I'm going to tag you in this. I hope to hell that when you become the Senate president, if that's your calling after Mitch McConnell loses this year and we take back the Senate, then you better get your ass in gear and get the Fairness Doctrine back on board.
He liked it back in 2009.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get him back on the train.
We've got to stop it.
I really think that we need to make sure that we do something with this. And Heidi and I mentioned, as we've mentioned it many times, we were hoping that some presidential candidate would put that back into their platform.
We even offered money and door knocking if they would just do it.
We did.
And then we didn't get that, our heart's desire with that. And I know Biden has talked about it, and sometime this week he's going to say who his VP pick is. And I don't care if it's the little stuffed loon my mom gave me. It's on my desk.
We're going to support whoever it is.
I will vote for whoever it is. I'm all on board.
Except for the conservative right-wing news outlets who will destroy that person, whether those destructions are valid or not.
Well, yeah.
Well, but that's just because there's no fairness doctrine anymore.
Right. There is no conscience in media anymore. And I think that's, and not all media, because Murray and I go out of our way to we research and we study and we do the hard work so you don't have to. And that's how the news used to be. I remember as a kid in the Chicago market, my parents listening to Fahey Flynn because he told it like it was. That was like a really big deal back then. And you could always trust Walter Cronkite to give you the truth. We don't
and that's
have
another
that
issue
anymore.
that could be addressed within that is clear and concise labeling among programming.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do that more evidently in social media because you'll see a headline and you'll jump to read the article and you'll see that it's an opinion instead of fact.
Right.
And we've talked about how commentators state things as fact rather than opinion.
Well,
so it is hard to find news that is information, just information.
Well, it used to be in order to give your opinion on a story, you had to be a columnist or you had to be part of the editorial board that editorialized things. You didn't get to just do it, but you had to be a columnist to color and shade. Otherwise, you were dependent on facts in delivery, okay, on your style of writing. And now everybody's the editorial board.
And people don't realize the difference, and we need to make sure that we find a way to get that implemented somehow. I think it would go a long way toward educating folks and balancing the information sources that occur and that are available to people.
And the one thing I want to impress upon people is the history we gave you of the Fairness Doctrine evolved within the less than the last 100 years. And things are going to change dramatically in how we communicate and how we get our news over the next 100 years. And we need somebody who's a visionary. That's why Murray and I had both hoped that when Biden takes office that he brings Andrew Yang in, a visionary, somebody who sees into the future, who thinks about the future all the time, to help shape policies a long distance out. We tend to be reactionary right now, and we can't be reactionary. We need to be proactive and need to think forward. And I think the next fairness doctrine is going to have a lot of forward thinking in it. I don't think we already know we're not going to live like the Jetsons this year. I'm a little disappointed because I want a flying car. But we need to really think about that. We need to think about forward from here. And Murray and I have a show coming up on how women are treated in the media that kind of really goes along with this, at how women are portrayed in the media. And we're not talking about how wonderful some women on like local TV news have it, where they get a chance to be honest and have integrity and not be a sexualized being or a vilified being. And we're going to talk about that too, because this goes hand in glove with this fairness doctrine, because it becomes very unfair when the misogyny of overriding the fairness doctrine comes to the surface. And it comes to the surface, especially on cable TV, with how women are treated. And we're going to talk about that coming up on another show. So
thank you for tuning in today to the fairness doctrine. I know it seems a bit archaic, but it's something that Heidi and I really believe needs to happen as we advance into the world of more and more communications and outlets. We need to find a way to give actual information to people and hold those who don't accountable. We'd have a lot less deaths if we were able to do that. A lot less situations would be life or death if we had this information and had the ability to make it fair and balanced.
We're going to give you a little bit of homework too. We want you to tweet every Democrat you know, including Joe Biden, and say
fairness doctrine.
Just hashtag fairness doctrine, because they have to understand that it's important to you to get the facts so that you can make a decision that's fair and balanced for yourself. So
thank you for tuning in. Please join us on Thursday. We have another great show coming up.
Yeah.
We also have some candidate interviews that are going to be launched and dropped, so stay tuned. Subscribe. If you don't subscribe, you don't know if one of your potential representatives is going to be on the show. So subscribe, like, share, Heartland Mama.
MAMAS.com. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.